The wind was howling at 50 miles an hour, dropping the temperature to a deadly 10 below. 18-year-old Leo Bennett had 20 minutes left to live before hypothermia stopped his heart. Then he tripped over a buried chimney. What he found beneath the snow didn't just save his life, it rewrote history. The digital clock on the microwave glowed a vibrant, mocking red, 11:59 p.m. It was December 14th. In exactly 1 minute, Leo Bennett would officially turn 18. For most teenagers, this milestone meant freedom college applications and a step into adulthood. For Leo, it meant a death sentence. Standing in the cramped kitchen of the only home he had ever known in Oak Haven, Pennsylvania, Leo clutched a garbage bag filled with 3 pairs of jeans, a few faded flannels, and a framed photograph of his mother, Sarah. She had passed away from aggressive pancreatic cancer just 6 months prior. With her gone, the house and Leo's fate fell completely into the hands of his stepfather, David Rollins. David was a bitter, calculating man who managed a local logistics company. He had never liked Leo, viewing the boy as a financial drain and a lingering ghost of Sarah's past. As the microwave clock clicked to 12 a.m., David walked into the kitchen, a freshly lit cigarette hanging from his lips. "Happy birthday," David sneered, his voice devoid of any warmth. He tossed a set of keys onto the counter, his own keys making a point. "You're a legal adult now, which means you're officially a trespasser in my house. Get out." Leo stood frozen, the harsh, fluorescent light buzzing overhead. "David, it's 10 degrees outside. The snowstorm is supposed to dump 2 feet tonight." "Not my problem," David replied, pulling his phone from his pocket. "I already spoke to Officer Miller at the precinct. He assured me that as the sole owner of this property, I have the right to evict an adult non-tenant. If you aren't out that door in 2 minutes, I'm calling dispatch and having you dragged out in handcuffs." There was no arguing. The cold, hard reality was that David had spent the last 6 months legally transferring all of Sarah's assets into his name, leaving Leo with nothing but the clothes on his back. Swallowing the lump of panic rising in his throat, Leo zipped his thin winter coat, hoisted the plastic bag over his shoulder, and walked out into the howling dark. The cold hit him like a physical blow. The wind in the Appalachian foothills didn't just blow, it bit. It tore through his thin jacket and instantly numbed his cheeks. Within 10 minutes of walking down the unlit county road, Leo realized the grim reality of his situation. Oak Haven was a small town. The nearest homeless shelter was 20 miles away in the city of Crestmont. He had no car, no money, and a phone battery hovering at 12%. He tried to seek refuge at a 24-hour gas station, but the night clerk, a stern man named Gary, tapped the "No Loitering" sign on the window and threatened to call the cops. The police were already a threat Leo couldn't risk facing. David had a lot of influence in their small town, and Leo knew he would somehow end up in a jail cell, or worse, dumped at the county line. Desperation drove Leo off the main road and into the sprawling expanse of the Blackridge State Forest. The trees provided a slight windbreak, but the snow was already shin-deep and accumulating fast. He figured he could find an old hunting blind or a hollowed-out tree to weather the night. By 2 a.m., hypothermia began its insidious work. First came the violent, uncontrollable shivering. His teeth chattered so hard his jaw ached. Then came the terrifying apathy. His extremities, fingers, toes, the tip of his nose stopped hurting and went entirely numb. The snow, which had felt like shards of glass against his skin, began to feel strangely soft. The heavy plastic bag slipped from his frozen fingers, tumbling into a snowdrift, but Leo didn't even bother to pick it up. He was so tired. "Just close your eyes for a minute," his exhausted brain whispered. "Just sit against this oak tree and rest." He collapsed against a massive snow-caked trunk, sliding down until he was sitting in the powdery white. The world around him started to blur, the howling wind fading into a muffled, distant hum. His vision tunneled, but as he let his head fall forward, something hard and unnatural stopped his foot. It wasn't a root. It was too perfectly straight, too metallic. Leo forced his heavy eyelids open and sluggishly kicked at the snow. His boot struck it again. A dull clink resonated. Driven by a primal final surge of adrenaline, Leo dug with his bare, frost-bitten hands. He uncovered a rusted iron pipe sticking out of a mound of snow. A chimney pipe. He wasn't sitting against a mound of earth. He was sitting on a roof. The blizzard of '78, combined with decades of overgrowth and the current storm, had effectively buried a structure built into the side of the ravine. Leo scrambled backward, sliding down the steep embankment of the snowdrift until his boots hit solid wood. It was a door half-rotted and jammed tight. With the last ounce of his fading strength, Leo threw his shoulder against the frozen wood. Once. Twice. On the third strike, the hinges shrieked. The wood splintered, and Leo tumbled forward into pitch-black darkness out of the wind. The silence inside was deafening. The air was stale, smelling of dry rot, ancient dust and pine needles, but it was gloriously, miraculously still. The wind howled furiously outside, but it could not reach him here. Leo lay on the dirt floor, gasping for breath, his body shaking violently, as the ambient temperature, perhaps a marginal 25 degrees, felt like a tropical wave compared to the sub-zero hellscape outside. He patted his pockets with numb, clumsy fingers and managed to pull out a cheap plastic lighter he used for lighting the grill back home. He struck it. The small flame illuminated his immediate surroundings. He was in a single-room cabin, no larger than a standard garage. It was built directly into the hillside, which explained why it was so well hidden and insulated. The walls were constructed of thick, hand-hewn logs. To his right was an old, rusted cast-iron wood stove, connected to the pipe he had tripped over. But it was what surrounded the stove that caught his attention. Stacked neatly against the stone backing was a cord of dried split firewood. Tears of pure relief froze on Leo's cheeks. He crawled toward the stove, grabbing handfuls of dry, brittle moss that had grown through the wall logs, and shoved it inside the iron belly. He piled on smaller twigs, then medium logs. He struck the lighter. It took 3 agonizing attempts, his frozen thumb barely able to turn the wheel, but finally the moss caught. A tiny orange flame flickered, then grew licking at the dry wood. Within 10 minutes, a roaring fire crackled in the stove, radiating a life-saving heat that slowly thawed Leo's frozen limbs. The pain of the blood rushing back into his fingers and toes was excruciating, a burning agony, but it meant he was alive. He dragged a rotting, moth-eaten armchair closer to the stove, curled into a tight ball, and let exhaustion pull him into a deep, dreamless sleep. The daylight discovery. Leo woke with a start, coughing, as a plume of smoke escaped the stove. Thin beams of morning sunlight pierced through the cracks in the splintered front door, illuminating the dust dancing in the air. He sat up his joints, screaming in protest. He was alive. He had survived the night. Now, by the light of day, Leo could truly take in his surroundings. The cabin looked like a time capsule. Dust coated everything in a thick grey blanket. There was a small cot in the corner, a wooden table with a single chair, and shelves lined with rusted tin cans. Beans, peaches, condensed milk, all long past edible. On the table sat a kerosene lantern and a thick, leather-bound book. Leo approached the table. He blew the dust off the cover of the book. It wasn't a book. It was a ledger. He opened the brittle, yellowed pages. The handwriting was elegant, written in fading fountain pen ink. April 12th, 1984. The township has no idea I am out here. If Rollins thinks he can bleed me dry and take the valley, he is a fool. I have hidden the leverage. He will never find it. Leo's breath hitched in his throat. Rollins. Could it be David Rollins's father? His grandfather? David had always bragged that his family had essentially built Oakhaven, owning vast tracts of land that made them local royalty. Leo flipped to the front of the ledger to find a name. Property of Elias Montgomery. The name struck a chord in Leo's memory. Elias Montgomery was a local legend, an eccentric, wealthy landowner who had vanished without a trace in the late 1980s. Rumor had it he went mad and wandered off into the woods to die, leaving his massive estate in a legal limbo that the Rollins family eventually capitalized on. Leo's heart pounded against his ribs. He read further into the ledger. The entries detailed a bitter feud. Elias and a man named Arthur Rollins, David's father, were once business partners. Arthur had embezzled funds and framed Elias for a massive local fraud, threatening to ruin Elias's name and take everything he owned. But Elias had a fail-safe. November 3rd, 1986. The final entry read, "My health is failing. The cough is worse with the cold. I cannot face the town again. But I will not let Arthur win. The real deeds to the Oakhaven Commercial District, the proof of his embezzlement, and the bearer bonds, everything of true value, are secured beneath the hearth. The Rollins family empire is built on stolen ground. Let the earth keep it until a righteous man claims it." Leo slowly lowered the ledger. He turned his gaze to the cast-iron stove and the rough-hewn stone hearth it sat upon. He grabbed the heavy iron poker resting beside the stove and dropped to his knees. The hearth was made of large river stones, cemented together with crude mortar. But looking closely, Leo noticed that the large flat slate stone directly in front of the stove door had no mortar around its edges. He wedged the flat tip of the iron poker into the crack. He pushed down with all his weight. The iron groaned. The stone resisted, heavy and stubborn, sealed by decades of settling dirt. Leo repositioned the poker, finding a deeper groove, and threw his entire body weight onto the handle. With a harsh, scraping sound, the slate stone popped upward. Leo tossed the poker aside and dug his fingers under the heavy rock, flipping it over. A cloud of ancient dust puffed into the air. Beneath the stone, resting in a meticulously lined cavity of dry cedar wood, was a heavy, military-style olive-drab steel lockbox. It was locked with a heavy brass padlock. Leo didn't care. He grabbed the iron poker again, bringing it down like a hammer. The cold air over decades had made the brass brittle. On the fourth brutal strike, the hasp shattered. Leo threw open the lid. Inside, wrapped tightly in heavy waxed canvas, were several thick manila envelopes. He pulled the first one out and unspooled the string tie. He tilted it toward the morning sunlight bleeding through the door. Inside were stacks of crisp, uncirculated $100 bills, but they weren't modern bills. They were Series 1934 gold certificates and mid-century bills perfectly preserved. There were tens of thousands of dollars here, worth significantly more today to collectors. But Leo's eyes were immediately drawn to the second much thicker envelope. It bore the official seal of the Oakhaven County Clerk, dated 1985. He opened it, unfolding the stiff, heavy parchment inside. They were property deeds. The original uncontested deeds to over 400 acres of prime Oakhaven real estate, the exact same land that David Rollins was currently finalizing a multi-million-dollar deal to sell to a corporate developer. Attached to the deeds were bank records, signed affidavits from whistleblowers, and clear, irrefutable paper trails proving that Arthur Rollins had forged the transfer documents. The Rollins family didn't own the land. They had stolen it. Leo sat back on his heels, the cold floor completely forgotten. He had walked into the forest a penniless, homeless orphan, left to die in the snow. Now, holding these papers, he held the key to entirely dismantling the life of the man who had tormented his mother and thrown him out into the cold. The hidden treasure of Elias Montgomery wasn't just money. It was the ultimate weapon. And Leo Bennett was ready to go to war. Leo spent the next 3 hours carefully cataloguing the contents of Elias Montgomery's lockbox. Besides the uncirculated bills and the damning property deeds, there was a handwritten journal detailing a labyrinth of offshore accounts and safe deposit boxes in Philadelphia. The wealth hidden in this forgotten cabin was staggering, but Leo knew that raw money wouldn't save him. In Oak Haven, David Rollins controlled the narrative. If Leo walked back into town with a box full of cash, Officer Miller would arrest him for theft before sundown, and David would simply seize the evidence. He needed an ally. More importantly, he needed to get out of Oak Haven jurisdiction entirely. The wind had finally died down by mid-morning, leaving behind a blindingly white, silent world. Leo rummaged through the back of the cabin and struck gold a pair of antique ashwood snowshoes hanging from a rusted nail. He bound them to his frozen boots using strips of the waxed canvas. He stuffed the ledger, the deeds, and a few stacks of the 1934 gold certificates into his plastic bag, double-knotting it to secure his newfound arsenal. Instead of hiking back toward Oak Haven, Leo turned north. It was a grueling 7-mile trek through the Black Ridge State Forest to reach the county line and the neighboring city of Crestmont. His muscles burned and his stomach cramped with violent hunger, but the fire of retribution kept his legs moving. By 2 in the afternoon, Leo stumbled out of the tree line and onto the plowed asphalt of Highway 9. He flagged down a passing salt truck, the driver taking one look at the shivering, exhausted teenager and offering him a ride into downtown Crestmont. Leo's first stop was a local diner. He ordered a black coffee and a heavy plate of eggs and hash browns. When the check came, he tentatively handed the waitress a crisp series $19,3400 bill. The manager was called over. He held the bill up to the light, tested the paper, and looked at Leo with intense suspicion. "Where did a kid like you get an antique note like this?" the manager asked, narrowing his eyes. "This is worth more than face value." "Family inheritance," Leo said without missing a beat, his voice raspy from the cold. "Keep the change. I just need to know where I can find the best property lawyer in this city." 30 minutes later, Leo was sitting in the mahogany-paneled office of Thomas Abernathy. Abernathy was a formidable man in his late 60s, a former state prosecutor who had retired to private practice. He was known for being ruthless, principled, and completely immune to small-town politics. Leo dumped the contents of the plastic bag onto Abernathy's pristine glass desk. "I was kicked out of my house at midnight to freeze to death," Leo said, his voice steady, despite the lingering tremors in his hands. "Instead, I found the ghost of Elias Montgomery, and I want to use this to destroy David Rollins." Abernathy adjusted his spectacles, his expression shifting from mild irritation at the unannounced walk-in to absolute stunned silence. He carefully unfolded the yellowed deeds, tracing the embossed Oak Haven County seals with his index finger. He read through Montgomery's journal, his eyes widening with every page. "Good God," Abernathy whispered, leaning back in his leather chair. Arthur Rollins practically built his reputation on the ashes of Elias Montgomery. Everyone knew there was bad blood, but the police ruled Elias's disappearance a suicide by exposure. Arthur claimed Elias sold him the acreage to pay off gambling debts before he vanished. "It was a lie," Leo said firmly. "Arthur forged the transfers. It's all in the ledger." Abernathy's mind was already working at a mile a minute. He picked up his desk phone and dialed his paralegal. "Hold all my calls. Pull up the current county property registry for the Oakhaven Commercial District." He looked back at Leo, his expression grim. "Leo, there's a massive complication. David Rollins has been trying to liquidate his father's assets. According to the Regional Business Journal, David is finalizing the sale of the entire Oakhaven Valley, 400 acres of commercial real estate, to Vanguard Horizon Development." "When?" Leo asked, his heart dropping. "Today," Abernathy said, looking at his computer monitor. "The signing ceremony is scheduled for 4 o'clock this afternoon at the Oakhaven Town Hall. It's a $40 million deal. Once those corporate signatures are on the paper and the money transfers untangling this fraud will take a decade of federal litigation." Leo looked at the grandfather clock in the corner of the office. It was 3:15 p.m. "Then we stop them," Leo said. Abernathy smiled, a shark-like grin spreading across his weathered face. "I've despised the Rollins family for 30 years. Let's go crash a party." The Oakhaven Town Hall was buzzing with self-important energy. The grand boardroom had been rented out for the occasion. Caterers carried trays of champagne, while local reporters snapped photos. At the head of the long oak table sat David Rollins, wearing a tailored Italian suit, looking every bit the triumphant king of his small-town castle. Opposite him sat 3 executives from Vanguard Horizon Development, flanked by a small army of corporate lawyers. David uncapped a gold fountain pen. "Gentlemen," he said smoothly, "this partnership will bring unprecedented growth to Oakhaven. My father Arthur envisioned a modern utopia for this valley. Today we make that a reality." He hovered the pen over the final signature line of the master contract. "I wouldn't sign that if I were you." The heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom slammed open, echoing like a gunshot. The room fell dead silent. Leo Bennett stood in the doorway, still wearing his dirt-stained, snow-soaked winter coat. Beside him stood Thomas Abernathy, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. David's smug expression vanished, replaced by a mask of pure shock, then boiling rage. He dropped the pen. "Leo, what the hell are you doing here?" "Officer Miller," David barked, gesturing to the uniformed cop standing near the catering table. "Arrest this kid for trespassing. I threw him out of my house last night." Officer Miller stepped forward, reaching for his handcuffs. "Come on, kid, you're making a mistake." "The only mistake here," Abernathy's voice boomed, cutting through the murmurs of the room, "is a police officer attempting to unlawfully detain my client while aiding and abetting a multi-million-dollar real estate fraud." The Vanguard executives exchanged nervous glances. One of their lead lawyers stood up. "Excuse me, who are you?" "This is a private corporate acquisition. My name is Thomas Abernathy, senior partner at Abernathy & Associates, and I represent the legal estate of Elias Montgomery." Abernathy marched to the table and slammed the heavy briefcase down. He snapped the locks open and pulled out a stack of legally certified photocopies he had rushed through his office. He slid a packet across the polished wood to the Vanguard lawyers. "You're about to purchase 400 acres of stolen land," Abernathy declared. "The man sitting across from you does not hold the legal title to the Oakhaven Commercial District. His father, Arthur Rollins, forged the deed transfers in 1985. David's face turned an ugly shade of crimson. "This is slander. That crazy old man disappeared decades ago. My family has held the deed for 40 years. Miller, get these lunatics out of here." "Actually," Abernathy corrected, pulling out the original heavy parchment deeds from 1985. "Montgomery never filed the sale. He hid the original uncontested deeds, along with a ledger detailing Arthur's embezzlement. We have the bank records. We have the whistleblower affidavits." The Vanguard lawyer quickly scanned the documents. His face went pale. He leaned over and whispered, frantically, into the ear of the lead executive. "This is a joke," David shouted. standing up so fast his chair tipped over. He pointed a trembling finger at Leo. "You ungrateful little parasite. You broke into my house and forged this garbage." "I didn't break into anything, David." Leo said, his voice calm, carrying an authority that belied his 18 years. "You locked me out to freeze to death, but I found a cabin buried in the Black Ridge snow. I found the truth." Leo pulled the journal from his coat pocket and tossed it onto the table. It landed right in front of David. "Elias Montgomery made sure your father wouldn't win. He just had to wait for the snow to melt." The lead executive from Vanguard stood up hastily, buttoning his suit jacket. "Mr. Rollins' Vanguard Horizon Development cannot proceed with an acquisition clouded by historical fraud and active title disputes. We are terminating negotiations immediately. Do not contact our offices again." "Wait, please," David pleaded, his voice cracking as the executives packed their briefcases and marched out of the room. The local reporters' cameras were flashing relentlessly, capturing David's total humiliation. David turned to Leo, his eyes wide with a manic desperation. He lunged across the table, grabbing Leo by the collar of his jacket. "I'll kill you! You ruined me!" Before Officer Miller could even decide whose side to take, the heavy double doors opened again. 2 state troopers walked in, accompanied by a grim-faced detective. Abernathy had made a few phone calls during their drive from Crestmont. "David Rollins," the detective said, flashing his badge. "We have a warrant for your arrest regarding the fraudulent transfer of the Sarah Bennett estate, as well as new charges of reckless endangerment and attempted manslaughter for locking a dependent out in sub-zero temperatures." David's hands went limp. He released Leo's jacket, stumbling backward as the state troopers stepped forward and firmly snapped handcuffs onto his wrists. The King of Oakhaven was dragged out of the room, his legacy shattered, his empire reduced to dust in less than 5 minutes. The aftermath. The subsequent legal battle took 6 months, but it was a landslide victory for Leo. With Abernathy's expert maneuvering, the state invalidated the Rollins claim to the Montgomery estate. Because Elias Montgomery had no living heirs, and Leo was the one who uncovered the remains and the stolen property, a sympathetic federal judge awarded Leo a substantial finder's fee and heavily discounted rights to purchase back the land, using the recovered gold certificates. Leo's first act of business was formally evicting David Rollins' belongings from the house he had shared with his mother, Sarah. He stood in the kitchen where he had been handed a death sentence on his 18th birthday, breathing in the quiet peace of the home that was finally his again. But Leo didn't stop there. He sold a portion of the commercial land to a responsible local developer, generating massive personal wealth. With that money, he bought the abandoned warehouse on the edge of Crestmont. He transformed it into the Sarah Bennett Foundation, a state-of-the-art, fully funded winter shelter for the homeless, at-risk youth and anyone who found themselves out in the cold. He ensured that no one in his county would ever have to wander into a blizzard, hoping to find a hidden cabin to survive the night. Leo Bennett went into the forest with nothing but a trash bag and a broken heart. He walked out with a Fortuna legacy and the power to change the world around him. He had faced the freezing dark, and he had brought back the fire. What an absolutely incredible journey of survival, justice, and ultimate payback. Leo's story proves that sometimes the darkest storms lead us exactly where we need to be to uncover the truth. If this thrilling, true story of resilience and hidden treasure kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant underdog story, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing real-life tales. See you next time.